Hi, welcome back to our Epsteinland series. Today is episode 5. It doesn't have to be that way. I want to take a step back. Over the last 4 episodes, we have described a system, a complete interlocking system of economic extraction, anonymous money, dismantled corruption law, and digitized graft that has been built deliberately over decades and in plain sight. And I recognize that by this point in the series, you might be feeling something close to despair, that the system is too entrenched, too powerful, too complete. It doesn't have to be this way. I understand that feeling, but I want to push back on it hard, because despair is exactly what the Epstein class needs from us. Despair produces inaction, and inaction is how they win. This episode is about hope. Not naive hope, not wishful thinking, evidence-based hope, rooted in American history, in legal precedent, and in the work of scholars who have studied how democracies actually fight back against concentrated power and win. The system we have described is not permanent. It was built. It can be dismantled. Americans have done it before, more than once. Let's start with where this country has started before, with Theodore Roosevelt. In 1901, when Roosevelt assumed the presidency after McKinley's assassination, the United States was in the grip of a concentration of corporate power that made today's Epstein Class look restrained. J.P. Morgan controlled vast railroad and steel empires. The Standard Oil Trust dominated the energy sector. A handful of men, operating through interlocking directorates, private agreements, and sheer financial muscle, effectively ran the American economy. Roosevelt looked at that system and decided to break it, not by working around it, not by finding a centrist compromise, but by using the full power of democratic government to confront it directly. He filed suit against J.P. Morgan's Northern Securities Railroad monopoly in 1902. Morgan reportedly sent an emissary to the White House to work out a private agreement, the way these things were done. Roosevelt refused. The Supreme Court ordered the trust dissolved. He went after Standard Oil. He went after the Beef Trust. He went after the Tobacco Trust. He used the Sherman Antitrust Act as a democratic weapon, the instrument of a government that understood its job was to represent the Epstein nation, or represent the nation, not the Epstein class of its day. And in his New Nationalism speech at Osawatomie, Kansas in 1910, he stated the principle that underlies this entire series. We should permit a fortune to be gained only so long as the gaining represents benefit to the community. Not charity, not noblesse oblige, a condition, the community's benefit as the precondition for the accumulation of private wealth. Then came FDR. After the Depression had revealed what unrestrained finance could do, what the absence of the guardrails TR had built actually looked like, FDR rebuilt the architecture of accountability from the ground up. Glass-Steagall separated commercial and investment banking. The SEC, Security and Exchange Commission, brought transparency and accountability to financial markets. Social insurance, Social Security, the idea that the risks of a modern industrial economy should be shared across the whole society rather than dumped on individuals, became law. The post-war equilibrium that followed was not perfect. As we discussed in episode 2, it was racially stratified in ways that deliberately excluded Black Americans. That caveat is essential, and we must not paper over it. But the basic principle that democratic government can set the terms of the economy in ways that benefit the many rather than the few was proven to work. For more than 3 decades, it worked. And it is not ancient history. After the savings and loan scandal of the 1980s, when a deregulated thrift industry collapsed through a combination of fraud, recklessness, and political capture, more than 1,000 executives were prosecuted. Hundreds went to prison. The people responsible for the disaster faced actual consequences, and the political accountability was real too. 5 U.S. senators, Democrat and Republican, were investigated for intervening with federal regulators on behalf of Charles Keating, a savings and loan executive at the center of the collapse. They became known as the Keating Five. John McCain was among them. He was reprimanded for poor judgment, and that experience, the shame of it, the public reckoning, drove McCain to become one of the Senate's most vocal advocates for campaign finance reform. McCain-Feingold, passed in 2002, was a direct result. The sad ending to this is that Citizens United gutted it. After Enron collapsed in 2001, taking employees' pensions and investors' savings with it, Ken Lay and Jeff Skilling were prosecuted. Skilling went to prison for 24 years. That accountability was not inevitable. It was a policy choice. Someone decided that the law applied to the powerful. Someone built the institutional capacity to enforce it. Someone had the political will to use it. We abandoned that policy choice after 2008. We can reclaim it. Which brings us to the present, and to someone who proves that the through line from TR to FDR is not just history, it is a living tradition that can be revived. Lina Khan became chair of the Federal Trade Commission in 2021 at 32 years old. She came in with a clear theory that antitrust law had been captured by a narrow economic framework that protected monopoly power rather than competition, innovation, or democracy. And she set out to change it. Under Khan, the FTC blocked anti-competitive mergers that previous administrations had waved through. It targeted big tech's self-preferencing, the practice of using platform dominance to crush competitors. It filed suits that the legal establishment said could not be won, and it proved that aggressive enforcement is possible even under hostile courts, even with limited resources, even against the most powerful companies in the world. Khan is now a professor at Columbia Law School. Her tenure at the FTC ended when the Trump administration took over, but what she demonstrated cannot be memory hold. We can't let that happen. The tools exist, the legal authority exists, the institutional capacity exists. What it requires is the political will to use them. Roosevelt to Khan. That is the through line of a rival operating system, one where law bites the powerful and government promotes the general welfare, rather than the welfare of the Epstein class. It's also important to note how defensive the Epstein class is. As you can see on this slide, very powerful people, some relatively progressive like Mark Cuban, and others, the usual suspects like Reid Hoffman and Barry Diller, speak for themselves. I'll give you a second to read that and then move on. But the question is not whether it's possible. History answers that. The question is whether we have the will. Now I want to introduce you to someone who has thought deeply about the how. M. Stephen Fish is a professor of political science at UC Berkeley. His book, Comeback, Routing Trumpism, Reclaiming the Nation, and Restoring Democracy's Edge, is one of the most practically useful things I've seen in years. Fish has studied how democracies fight back against authoritarian populism, what works, what doesn't, and why the Democrats keep making the same mistakes. His central argument is simple and uncomfortable. The reason Trumpism wins is not primarily that its policies are popular, it is that its style is dominant, and the opposition has been responding with the wrong tools. Fish calls the alternative high dominance politics, not authoritarianism, not aggression for its own sake, but a political style that is confident, unapologetic, and emotionally compelling. A style that signals strength rather than accommodation, that names things directly rather than hedging, that leads with moral clarity rather than political nuance. Trumpism thrives on dominance displays, boldness, emotional intensity, the projection of strength, real or performed. Traditional liberal politics responds with nuance, policy detail, and careful hedging. Fish argues this is bringing a policy brief to a dominance contest, and the policy brief loses, always, over and over again. This does not mean abandoning substance. It means leading with values and moral clarity and letting the policy follow. It means telling the story of what you stand for before you explain how you'll implement it. It means treating voters as people who deserve moral arguments, not technocratic management. Fish makes a specific argument about patriotism that I find particularly powerful. The conservative political vocabulary has claimed the language of national identity for decades. The flag, the military, American greatness. The right has made these symbols their own, and in doing so has made it feel uncomfortable for the left to use them. Fish says, just as we discussed with the use of freedom, take them back. Their patriotism is about who to keep out. Ours is about what we're building together. That's the Roosevelt's tradition. The patriotism that says America's greatest tradition is the tradition of fighting back against concentrated power, the tradition of the trust buster, the New Deal, the civil rights movement, the tradition of making the promise real for more people toward a more perfect union. That is not their tradition. That is ours. And we should say so loudly and without apology. Fish also argues for what he calls strategic confrontation. Rather than avoiding conflict, rather than softening criticism, hedging accusations, qualifying every statement about what is actually happening, democratic leaders should name authoritarian behavior directly. Call a lie a lie. Call corruption corruption. Call the dismantling of democratic norms what it is. This is not name-calling, it is accuracy. And accuracy, delivered with confidence and moral clarity, builds trust in a way that careful hedging never can. Fish cites Gretchen Whitmer and Gavin Newsom as current examples of high dominance politics done well. I will add JFK, RFK Sr., MLK, and Barbara Jordan. Confident, clear, emotionally engaged. Not performing anger, but not suppressing it either. The controlled urgency of people who understand the stakes and are not pretending otherwise. I want to add my own observation here as a physician. The diagnostic posture, the posture I've tried to maintain throughout this series, is not the same as the political posture Fish is describing. A diagnostician names the pathology precisely and dispassionately. A democratic leader does something more. They name the pathology and then invite people to do something about it together. The series has been the diagnosis. Episode 6 is the treatment plan. And treatment plans only work if people believe that it can work, if they believe in their own capacity to act. That is what high dominance politics at its best does. It does not just describe the problem, it conveys the conviction that the problem can be solved. Fish's final argument connects directly back to what we discussed in episode 3 about Anat Shenker-Osorio and the framing war. Facts alone do not move people. Feelings move people. Not manipulation, legitimate moral emotion. Anger at injustice, pride in doing right, shame at betrayal. The emotions that arise naturally when people understand what is actually being done to them and by whom. Technocratic messaging, the careful policy brief, the well-sourced white paper, the 5-point plan, treats politics as an information problem. If we could just explain it clearly enough, people would understand and act. Fish says no. ASO says no. Politics is a values problem, and values are communicated through stories, through moral clarity, and through the lived experience of people who have been in the fight. Which is why stories matter. How we make people feel about things matters more than how we make them think about things. As Nobel-winning behavioral economist Daniel Kahneman says, people don't choose between things, they choose between descriptions of things. The story is not a decoration, it is the argument. So let me bring this together. The system we have described over 5 episodes, the bailout capitalism, the dark money, the dismantled corruption law, the neuroscience of inherited entitlement, is not a law of nature. It is not the inevitable outcome of capitalism or human selfishness or the complexity of modern societies. It was built deliberately by people who knew what they were doing. That means it can be unmade deliberately by people who know what they are doing. The tools exist, the historical precedents exist, the institutional knowledge exists, the legal authority exists. What has been lacking is the political will, the moral clarity, and the willingness to name the system and to fight it directly. Theodore Roosevelt looked at J.P. Morgan and said, "The law applies to you." Franklin Roosevelt looked at Wall Street and said, "The government works for the people, not for you." Lina Khan looked at Amazon and Google and said, "The law still applies to you. 3 different eras, 3 different opponents. One through line: democratic accountability as a living practice, not a rhetorical aspiration. That is the rival operating system. And episode 6 is about what it looks like as a political platform. What 5 concrete planks would actually dismantle the machine we have spent 5 episodes describing. In the next episode, we'll bring it all together. 5 platform planks, a 2026 accountability agenda that is not a wish list. It is a set of concrete, historically grounded, legally achievable demands. Reverse Citizens United, the Honest Government Act, Financial Accountability 2.0, the Neo-Brandesian Trust Act, Inheritance Reform. And we are going to talk about why this agenda beats Trumpism, not just morally, but strategically. Why naming the Epstein Class is better politics than chasing the median voter. Why the people who will decide 2026 are not mythical centrists. They are people who need a reason to show up. If this episode gave you hope, share it, because hope, like despair, is contagious, and we need to spread that right now. I'm Chris Hughes, and I'll see you in episode 6. Thanks.